Hey everyone, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder and welcome to episode 14. Today we're going to be adding a new endpoint to our API so that we can drill down into our products and get some details on an individual product. We'll add that to the API today, and then in the next episode we'll go ahead and consume that from the website. So, without any delays, let's get All right, from here on out, I assume that you know how to get code for these episodes. So if you don't, it's github.com/noblecausecode to follow along. There's our API project and our UI project. And if you aren't familiar with how to use Git to get those, then go ahead and check out the card above that shows you how to download code for the course. I've already got the code downloaded, so I'm going to go into my projects episode 14 Savage Cell API and open up the solution. We're going to go ahead and start by running this, and you should also launch Postman if you want to follow along. And we'll start by making sure that our existing code is still up and running and working. And it looks like it is from Swagger. We're going to go ahead and make sure with our Postman call, we're going to do a get to our API products. And there is our list of 9 products. So the idea for today is we're going to want to pass one of these IDs in, and we will only want to see the details for that one product. So if I pass in a 3, I should see blue earrings. So how do we do it? First thing we do is we go into our controller, and since we are looking at the details of a product, I'm going to add this code to the products controller. I'm going to stop the project and open up my products controller. So far we only have one thing in here, which is our get that we just called, and that calls out to a service that calls get products and returns that list of products. For this one, we're also going to use a get, but we're going to have to pass the ID of the item that we want to retrieve. So it'll start the same with HTTP GET. And we're also going to have to add a route because you can only have one default HTTP GET in here. If there's more than one, you have to tell it which one is going to respond to the get call. So route takes a parameter, which is a string. So for now, I'm going to leave that blank for the moment, and we're going to define the rest of our method. So it's going to be public so that we can call it. It's going to return an iAction result, the same as all of our other endpoints. And this is where I was saying before that you'll start to see a pattern evolving. This one we're going to call get product because we're going to get a specific product. And for now, let's just say we're going to return OK. Now, we don't want to get all products. We want to get a specific product's ID. So we're going to have to pass in a parameter here with the ID number of the product we want to get. And that's going to come in as a string, and we'll just call it ID. When we make this call in our web browser, it's going to probably be something like https://localhost, and then whatever our port is, whatever that is, / and now we got to look up here. It defaults to API and then the name of the controller, which is products. Right, so API/products. So let's add that in there, API/products. And then we want to send in the ID of the product. So by sending a get to this, we're basically saying, give me the product with the ID of 1. Well, /API/products is given to us by this route. So now we just want to, from this route command, we want to put everything else past API products /. So in our case, we just want the 1 to be an ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of tell it that we want this, whatever is passed here, whether it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or whatever the ID is. The ID in your case might be ABC123, might be the product ID of your product. Whatever that is, we're going to want to pass it here after the /. So we do that in our route command by telling it, hey, we're going to pass a variable, and whatever that variable is, we're going to call it ID. And so it's really important that this name ID matches this name, and it's going to do something called parameter binding. Parameter binding is a built-in mechanism in Web API to make these kinds of things easy. We don't have to go and map. We don't have to parse out the string and look for the ID. We just tell it, hey, in the route, there's going to be an ID in there. And when you find it, pass it in as the argument to this getProduct method. So looking at this another way, if we had products and our product was made up of different components, different parts, and you could maybe order individual parts, we might want to say something like, give me the products where the ID is 1 and the parts number is ABC. And so this get product would probably be called something like get product part. And then we could, in here, tell it we're going to have the ID /parts. And then we want to grab another thing called part number. And then we could add another argument here called part number, and it would automatically, in a URL that looks like this, it would automatically grab the ID, because that happens right after API products, according to this route, and then the ID would be next, so it mapped that ID to that ID, and then parts matches this, and after parts is another variable, which we put in curly braces, so we would match the part number and it would pass that in. It would bind that by itself. But for our case here, we are only interested in the ID. So I'm going to get rid of that now that you understand. And so I'm just going to expect back a product, an individual product, and it's going to equal our products service dot get product, and we'll pass in the ID that is passed into us. So we're telling the service, go and get the product with this ID. And when you find it, assign it to this variable product, and then just return that to the caller, to whoever calls this. So let's go ahead and add the service in for get products. So if I go to my service, and instead of typing out the method here, I'm going to first add it to my interface. And so I will have an interface. So what I'm going to return is a product. When we called get products, we returned a list of product, right? More than one product, a whole list of them. In this case, we're asking for one, and it's going to be called get product, and it's going to take in a string ID. Now, because this is an interface and it's public, we don't need public here. It's assumed because if it were private, you wouldn't be able to get to it through the interface. And so anything that's using this interface wouldn't even see these things. So they're automatically public. So I'm going to remove the public just to make that more clear. And then I'm going to go back into my service. I'm going to hover this red line, and I'm going to tell it to implement this interface change, and it'll add the new method for me. So it's going to add get product that takes an ID and returns a product. We're not going to throw an exception. We are going to have it call out and return the result of the products repository.getProduct, and we're going to pass it an ID. So really, the repository has the same addition to it in this case as our service. So I'm going to copy that line and add it to the repository interface. I'm also going to get rid of public in here. That was just for example. And then in our products repository, once it realizes we've changed things, I will implement that interface. And in this case, in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first get the whole list of products. So I'll say var products equals get products, because we already have that method here. When we call get products, we get back a list of products. So it creates an empty list, adds them all to the list, and at the bottom, it returns the list. So if I just call it from another method in here, then I've got all the products. So now what I want to do, I want to grab the product that I need by ID from my products. There's a bunch of ways to do that. The way that you're probably most familiar with, without using something called link that I'm going to cover in 1 second, would be to do a for each. And we would say var product in products. And we loop through those one at a time. And then we can just say if product.id is equal to the string ID that we passed in, then we can return that product. And if we make it all the way through the list and we don't find it, then we can return a null. So this is complaining because product ID is actually an int in our product object model. If we look inside the object model, you can see ID is an int. I can't compare an int to a string. I could either put a .toString at the end of this. That would satisfy that. Or I could convert the ID here. I could do an int.parse. That would work. I could add the system using statement in and do a convert.to int32. And that would work. I think all of these ways are okay. But if we go through this loop, every time we go through this loop, if we have to convert this to a string or convert this to an integer, and then we compare it and it's not equal, and then we go back through our loop to the next product and we have to convert again, and then we have to convert again, and then, until we get through this list of products could be really big. So to save a little bit of overhead, the easier way to do that for me would just be to create a new variable called ID number and make that equal to something like convert to int32 and then I could just use this ID number. I convert it once here and then just use that variable in here over and over, and that way I don't have to convert each product's ID to a string, and I only convert the ID to a number once. So that makes things a little better. And so here we're going to either return the product that we find if the ID matches, and this is fine. This will go through each one and it will return that. Another way to write that using something called link, if we add a using for system.link, if you know any SQL, this will seem somewhat familiar to you. But we can actually take our products list. We can add a filter or a where clause to our list. And then we add what's called a lambda expression, which uses an equals greater than that looks like an arrow on my screen. On yours, it'll look like those two characters put together. But because of my font ligatures, it'll change that into an actual arrow. So don't worry if yours doesn't look the same. But so we're saying products where P arrow, and then we can use that P. So what that means is the where clause is going to loop through each of the products. And just like we had our products loop here where each product comes in scope for each iteration of the loop. Like if I renamed this product variable P, right? Every time through this for each loop, P would represent, the first product on the list, then the second, then the third, and we could compare each one to the ID. That's what this P is. It's one product in the list, one at a time, looped through. So then I can say P dot ID the same way we did it there, and I can do equals equals ID number, same way as before. So the result of this where actually is an IEnumerable, which is like another list. Because when you use link and you say where, it doesn't know. In our case, there's only one ID 1, one ID 2. But what if I were looking for p.title? There potentially could be 2 items in my product list that have the same title. They don't in my case, but it could. So where is going to bring back more than one, even though I know there's only going to be one that matches. Where is going to give it to me in a collection or in a list containing only one item. So I want to tell it, just give me the first or the default. And what I mean by default is, if there is no first, if you don't find a match in here, whatever the default is for a product, which is null. If I don't have a product, it's an object, and if there is no object, it's null. So this is going to return me either a product or null, the same way we returned our product here, or we return null. So I can just return that, and it's just a lot easier to type than the whole loop. If you wanted to do this the object-oriented way, you also could do PID.equals, and you could pass it the ID number that way. That also will work. I usually don't do it in this syntax, just preference though. And there's another link syntax too, but I don't want to get into that. I don't want to confuse you, because you'll see this a lot in C# code. Because it's so shorthand, pretty much everybody does it this way now. It is a little bit slower performance-wise than using a for each loop, and a for each loop is a little slower than using a for loop, and so on. So if you're working with millions of rows, which you probably shouldn't be, but if you find yourself in some odd scenario where this is too slow, you can try the others and kind of performance time those out if you have to. So here we're returning either our product or a null. That'll go back to our service, which will return it directly to our... oops. So what I did here is I mistakenly put get products when it is clearly called get product. And if I would have hovered over that, it says no overload for get product takes an argument, because get products doesn't take arguments, but get product does. So just a typo on my part. Let's go ahead and run this. And in Postman, I can get my list of products, or if I just want product 2, I should be getting back just the blue shirt. Let's try it. There it is, looking good. So if we want to step through that to see how that works, I'm passing API products/2. So because of parameter binding, the ID comes in as 2. I don't know if you can see that, but it is a 2 in quotes. And then our 2 gets passed into our service, which gets passed down into our repo, which converts our 2 to a number. We call get products. That gives us a list of 9 products. There they all are. And then we go through our products and return only the ID where it equals 2. And that returns 1 product back. The product is, in fact, a blue t-shirt with ID 2. And we get it back in Postman. You can also do the same in Swagger. If you click on the product's ID and click try it out, you can put in the ID you want. In this case, let's do a 3 this time and click execute. I'm going to turn off my breakpoint. And if you look down here, we got back our ID of 3. So we are good to go. All right, so for the last 10 minutes or so here, let's open up Visual Studio and let's jump over to our UI code since we have a few extra minutes. And what I want to do is fix that issue that we had last time. So I'm going to open up the Bootstrap documentation for the grid. If you want some background on this, check out the Flexbox tutorial short, which is not really a short lengthwise. It's kind of a short one-off subject that we did. And the Flexbox code is used in Bootstrap. So when we look at laying things out in a grid, it actually uses Flexbox behind the scenes to get these layouts to work. So when we ran our code last time, we got back our 9 products from the API, but they're all in one single column, and we wanted those to lay out across the page. So let's look at the code that actually lays that stuff out. That is in my view home index.cshtml. And you can see that I just have my H1 title of Savage Cell, which is this guy up here. And then I have a horizontal rule below it. And then I have these cards that are kind of stacked one on top of another. And so there's my H1 title, there's my horizontal rule, and then I loop through and I create a card for each one. So let's check out a pen that is basically the same as what our project is doing. I'm just going to put a div with a column, and we'll just put 6 columns. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I'll just do a little formatting of it. Okay. So what we want is we have these columns stacked right now. Each of these divs represents kind of the card that we're showing in this layout. So just let's pretend for now. And so what we have to do is we have to look at the Bootstrap documentation to figure out how these rows work. So it looks like we have a container, then we have a row, and a row has a column. If we get down into it a little bit, we can see under rows, columns that we can start aligning things in a grid. And this kind of looks like what we want. We want it to go a certain number and wrap. Well, the problem is that how do you know when to wrap? I could be on a huge screen. I could be on a mobile device, a cell phone, a tablet computer, anything in between, a laptop. So we want to define our own rules, and those rules are going to be different for whatever your app is. It's up to you how you want it to look on different screens. So let's just steal this row class here and see what it does to our pen. So I'm going to make a row, and then I need another div to close that row. So if I format that, so now I got this row, and then I've got all these columns. So one thing that we have to do in CodePen is we have to tell CodePen that we want it to use Bootstrap, because right now I haven't gone into this CSS window here and told it what row means or what rows-calls-2 means. It doesn't know what text-center or display-4 is. It doesn't know any of that. So I'm going to go into this little gear, and I'm going to go down into the bottom where it says add external style sheet. So I'm going to search in this box for Bootstrap, and you see here's Twitter Bootstrap. Twitter makes Bootstrap. So we want to use this library, so I just click it and hit save and close. And now you'll see that it's starting to look more like our actual site, and it's divided our columns up into 2 columns. So to make this easier to see, we're going to add 2 classes here. I want to tell Bootstrap that this is a column and to treat it as a column within our row. So we'll add col, and then just so we can see it in this example, I'm going to add a border. And this class is part of Bootstrap, and you can see hopefully that it puts that border. Let me try and make that bigger so that you can see it better. Hopefully you can see that thin line there. And so I'm going to replace our 6 columns with just this. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we'll have 6 items in 2 columns, and the 2 columns are because we said, hey, there's a row, and we wanted to use 2 columns. And if we keep looking, it starts to talk about the sizes of the columns. So when you see this, now it's saying, hey, this is a row, and normally I want everything in 1 column, but on a small display, make it 2 columns, and on a medium display, make it 4 columns. And it worries about what those column breaks are. So in my case, what I want to do is I want to say, hey, I normally want 4 columns. Right? So there's my 4 columns. Okay, so I set this up with 4 columns, 4 row columns, and so we have these 6 columns in here. And so because I said row calls 4, I get 4 columns and then it wraps. But depending on the size of your device, so we can do our row calls, and then we can put, for large devices, keep it at 4, and then for our medium devices, they can also handle 4. And for our small devices, let's make those 2. And our extra small devices, will make those 1. I think extra small, I might have the wrong. Small, medium, large, extra large, XS. Okay, so let's change that to XS. So now if I change the size of my browser, I still have 4 across at this width, but as I start to get smaller, I'm going to trip into, now I'm at 2 columns. So this is the small. It's now using the size of small. And then as I really get smaller, where's my, I guess I can't get to extra small in here. Oh, I have a typo. This is supposed to be MD, not medium. There we go. All right, let's try that again. So now if we start getting into smaller devices, here, let's do it the other way. So if I go to inspect and tell it I want to see this on a device, and I want that device to be a phone, the iPad jumps to 3. The iPad Pro is at 3. The Surface Duo, which is a bit bigger, goes back to a width of 4. So let's try adding a little bit of a gutter to our, I think we're just running into a CodePen thing where we don't have enough padding and spacing in here. Let's see if we can get it to jump to 1 column for small now. Yeah, there it goes. So that's what's happening. This is all CodePen stuff. But basically, I've told it to give the whole grid a gutter of 4, which is, I forget how many rem. We could look that up in Bootstrap, but it just kind of gives this extra space in our grid. So now that we know this, let's take this exact code and let's add it to our designs. So I want to, before my for each, I want to put my div, and then after my for each, I want to add another div. Okay, so now I've got my div in there, and then inside, instead of just a card, I need to put my card in a div, and the div's just going to have the class of call, right? Just like our example here, I have my rows, and then each div, it has a call. I'm not putting a border around the card. The card has its own border. So this column represents, the word column represents where the card would go. And so let's save that and try refreshing our page here. And now we have a nicer layout of our cards that are 3 wide. And if we shrink our site, Bootstrap should, see, it bounces it down to 1 column when it's too small. Now 4 across is obviously too big, too small, because the width of our cards just won't fit in an area that small. So we probably should make that one at least 3. So if we make our default 3, if it doesn't match anything, then if we refresh, so it kind of gets a little too small here anyway. So we would have to do something with our cards to make them more scalable. Right now, the images that are in there are kind of fixed in their size and they won't go smaller. And so that's causing the cards to kind of stack on each other. But we're not going to get into that right now. This isn't really a course on responsive design, but we have our site laying out and it looks pretty good. And we'll worry about those kind of small details when we get closer to the finish. So next time we will be able to click on one of these items and then drill in and see the details of that item with an add to cart button. We'll start planning out our shopping cart so that we can track our sales, and we'll talk about what we're going to use for back-end storage, and we'll really start to make this thing a real website instead of just with hard-coded data. And we'll be able to filter some of our selections and put all kind of cool features into this. But for today, I think we're good with our endpoint. Hopefully you understood the parameter binding and how all that stuff works. And now you are a little more comfortable adding new service methods and new repository methods so that you can actually implement new features in your API. And then we'll go ahead and consume those features from our web. And you'll see that they're just repeating patterns. All the callouts from the web just call out to get data, and then they display it. All the APIs just go out and get data and return it. And so we're just going to keep doing this process, adding features and learning how to do the things that we need to do. So until next time, thanks so much for joining. Please practice as always. If you feel that you like this stuff, please let me know. Subscribe if you think this is helpful. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I guess that's it. So I will see you soon, and I will see you online.